Terra had known 10,000 years of unending vigilance, yet even in that age of ceaseless prayer and grinding machinery, there existed moments when the planet seemed to breathe as one. This was not such a moment. The silence came without warning, not as a thunderclap but as an absence so profound that every soul upon the throne world felt it in their marrow. Across the void the Astronomicon guttered, its psychic fire faltering like a dying star, and for the first time since the age of strife, the Emperor's light failed to answer the unspoken call of humanity. Within the imperial palace, where incense never ceased to burn and the air itself was heavy with sanctified ash, the golden throne shuddered. It was a subtle tremor, no more than a whisper through adamantium and auramite, yet every custodian felt it. The machine's endless hymn of pain and power faltered, its sacred rhythm stumbling as if some unseen hand had reached into reality and loosened the bolts that bound existence together. Servo skulls froze in mid-flight, candles guttered. The vast choir of psychic resonance that sustained the Emperor's withered form dropped into a dreadful hush. Across Terra, alarms began to toll. In the spires of Hive Targus and the depths of forgotten manufactorums, adepts paused in their labors, struck by a sudden nameless dread. Astropaths collapsed, blood streaming from sightless eyes as the warp recoiled from them. Navigators clawed at their helms, screaming that the guiding light had vanished, replaced by a sky that felt wrong, unfamiliar and hostile. Above the planet, defense platforms spun uselessly, their augurs reporting star patterns that did not belong to any chart preserved since old night. In the Sanctum Imperialis, the Adeptus Custodes moved with measured urgency. They did not panic, they were incapable of it. Yet even these gene-forged sentinels, bred to stand eternal watch over the master of mankind, felt the weight of an unthinkable truth pressing upon them. The Emperor was still there, his ruined body bound to the throne by 1,000 sacred interfaces, yet something fundamental had changed. The psychic pressure that radiated from him, once an unrelenting storm, now felt distant as though echoing across an immeasurable gulf. High above the palace, the sky tore itself open, not with the violence of a warp breach, but with the slow, grinding agony of reality being rewritten. Clouds stretched and twisted into impossible geometries. The sun dimmed, its light refracted through laws of physics that no longer fully applied. For a heartbeat that seemed to last an eternity, Terra existed nowhere at all, suspended between one universe and another, its billions of souls balanced on the edge of annihilation. Then the stars returned. They were wrong. Constellations unfamiliar to any imperial savant burned coldly overhead, their arrangement whispering of histories humanity had never lived and wars it had never fought. The warp seethed uneasily, its tides disrupted, as though even the chaos gods struggled to comprehend this intrusion into a foreign cosmology. Across the planet faith wavered, millions fell to their knees, praying louder, harder, desperate to force the Emperor's gaze back upon them. Others wept in silence, struck by the heretical thought that Terra itself had been abandoned. Deep within the Golden Throne, ancient mechanisms strained against impossible parameters. The device had been built to anchor the Emperor within a universe shaped by the Immaterium's familiar currents. Now those currents shifted, dragging against the throne's arcane geometry. Alarms whispered in Binharik through the Narthosphere, messages of error and deviation cascading faster than the tech priests of Mars could interpret them. The throne endured, but it endured in protest, its machine spirit howling softly at a fate it could not comprehend. As the first hours passed, it became clear that this was no localized disaster, no passing fluctuation of the warp. Terra was alone. The Sol system's familiar echoes were gone, replaced by a vast indifferent void. Somewhere beyond those alien stars, powers watched, ancient and unknowable, as the heart of the Imperium struggled to understand its exile. And upon the Golden Throne, the Emperor of Mankind sat in silence, his will obscured, leaving humanity to face a single, terrifying question without his guiding voice. Had the throne fallen silent because he could not speak, or because something else now listened? The High Lords would later argue over the exact moment the truth set in, but on that first day there was only instinct and fear. Void shields remained raised, yet every commander knew they were meaningless if reality itself had shifted beyond imperial comprehension. Shrines overflowed as preachers proclaimed judgment and renewal in the same breath, their voices cracking beneath cathedral vaults that had stood since the Great Crusade. In hidden chambers, inquisitors recorded everything, already suspecting that survival might demand heresies not yet named. Terra endured, as it always had, but endurance without certainty was a new and bitter trial. Above all, the absence lingered, a vast, suffocating quiet where the Emperor's presence should have been, pressing upon every thought and prayer like a verdict yet to be spoken. No bells marked the passing of that day, no proclamation named the catastrophe, yet Terra felt the axis of destiny shift beneath its foundations, and somewhere in the dark between universes, a reckoning began to move toward the throne world. Whether salvation or extinction followed now depended on choices humanity had never imagined making. The second day began without dawn as Terra had once known it. The sun rose late and pale, its light filtered through an unfamiliar firmament that bent color and shadow into subtle distortions. To the untrained eye it was merely an overcast morning, but to every augur, every void savant and every soul attuned to the deeper truths of the galaxy, the sky itself proclaimed a blasphemy. The stars above Terra no longer answered to the Emperor's design. In the void, the Sol system's defense arrays continued their eternal vigil, yet their readings conflicted with one another as if reality could not agree on its own shape. Star forts attempted to triangulate familiar beacons and found none. Ancient machine spirits, awakened for the first time in centuries, returned only fragmented data and strings of binharic confusion. It was as though Terra had been lifted from the map of existence and set down upon a page written in a language humanity had never learned. Within the imperial palace, the high lords convened in grim silence. Marble halls echoed with the distant chanting of the faithful, a constant reminder that billions still believed salvation would come if they prayed loudly enough. Yet belief did not steady the data slates spread across the obsidian table. The Astronomicon was not merely dimmed, it was gone, its psychic radiance severed from a warp that no longer aligned with the Emperor's vast will. For the first time in 10 millennia, Terra could not guide humanity's ships. The Imperium beyond Sol, if it still existed at all, had been plunged into absolute darkness. Astropaths were brought before the council, their minds scarred and trembling. Those who still lived spoke of attempts to reach outward, of screams swallowed by an immaterium that felt thin and distant, like an echo chamber stripped of sound. Messages cast into the warp returned twisted or not at all. Some reported sensations of immense silence, others of pressure, as if unseen intelligences pressed against the edges of their thoughts, curious but restrained. None could say whether the Emperor's voice was absent or merely drowned beneath a greater cosmic distance. Across Terra, faith splintered in quiet, dangerous ways. The ecclesiarchy declared days of unending devotion, ordering the cathedrals to remain open as incense choked the air and hymns rose without pause. For many, the absence of the Emperor's light was proof of a divine trial, a test meant to burn weakness from the faithful. For others, doubt crept in like a slow poison. If the Emperor's stars no longer shone above holy Terra, then where did his dominion truly end? The custodians maintained their watch, sealing routes, fortifying sanctums, and speaking little. They felt the Emperor still, faint but present, like the afterglow of a fire that refused to die. Yet even they could not deny that his presence seemed stretched, attenuated across a gulf that should not exist. Some among them wondered, in thoughts they would never voice, whether Terra had been taken beyond the Emperor's reach, or whether he now reached beyond himself to grasp something new. On the streets below, riots did not yet erupt, but tension coiled in every hive and spire. Void-born workers whispered that the stars were wrong. Scholars were dragged from their habs by fearful crowds demanding answers no mortal could give. The Adeptus Arbites doubled their patrols, aware that belief sustained order and belief was beginning to fracture. Even the most devout could not ignore the sky forever. From orbit, picked captures of Terra were transmitted endlessly into the palace. The planet looked unchanged, its continents and oceans intact, its defenses whole. Yet every image carried an unspoken accusation. Terra remained the heart of the Imperium, but the arteries that once connected it to the galaxy had been severed. Isolation settled like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. Deep within the golden throne, the Emperor did not stir. The machinery that bound him hummed and strained, compensating for forces it had never been designed to endure. Tech priests whispered litanies as they worked, their logic engines screaming warnings they barely understood. The throne still functioned, but it functioned blindly, reaching into a cosmos that no longer answered with familiar laws. As the second night fell, the alien stars burned brighter, cold and indifferent. Terra lay beneath them, defiant yet uncertain, its people gazing upward in fear and reverence alike. Somewhere beyond that unfamiliar sky, the truth waited, vast and unknowable, and as humanity clung to prayer and protocol, a single realization took root within the deepest councils of power, unspoken but undeniable. If the Emperor's stars no longer watched over Terra, then whatever ruled this universe might already be watching instead. On the third day the warp answered at last, and its answer was wrong. Not hostile in the way humanity had learned to fear, not yet, but altered, as if the Imperium itself had been bruised by Terra's arrival. Across the Thron world, every soul touched by psychic sensitivity felt it simultaneously, a pressure behind thought, a resonance that did not align with any known current of the great ocean. It was the sensation of standing beneath a sky where familiar stars had been rearranged into unfamiliar meanings. Astropaths were the first to break. Those who had survived the initial silence now found their dreams invaded by symbols that did not belong to the Emperor's lexicon. Some spoke of vast horizons of lightless matter, of concepts instead of gods, of forces that did not hunger for worship yet commanded obedience through inevitability alone. Their screams echoed through sanctioned chambers as medicos restrained bodies writhing under invisible strain. The warp had not rejected them, it had acknowledged them, and in doing so revealed its difference. Navigators reported the most disturbing revelations. Through their third eyes, they gazed into the Imperium and found it thinner, stretched taut across an unseen framework. The tides still flowed, but they obeyed rhythms no navigator house had ever charted. Where once the Astronomicon had been a blazing certainty, there was now only absence, surrounded by patterns that felt vast, cold, and profoundly ancient. Some navigators whispered that the warp here was not ruled by passion and excess alone, but by principles that predated emotion itself. Within the imperial palace, the Inquisition took full control of psychic affairs. Entire choirs were quarantined. Black ships already docked in orbit were sealed, their holds reinforced as the risk of uncontrolled manifestation grew. Demonic incursions did not yet occur, but that absence was itself alarming. The warp did not thrash against Terra's presence as it would have in known space. Instead, it observed, as though measuring. The Adeptus Mechanicus reached a grim conclusion through logic engines and forbidden archives. The Imperium was not universal in structure, it was shaped by the realities it reflected. Terra had been displaced into a cosmos whose psychic underpinnings differed at a fundamental level, and chaos, though present, did not reign here with the same unchallenged dominion. This universe had rules that even the ruinous powers did not fully command. That truth sent a tremor through every sealed chamber where it was spoken. If chaos was not supreme here, then neither was the Emperor by default. Faith had always been the Imperium's shield against annihilation, but faith required recognition. A god unheard was a god diminished. The question no one dared ask aloud began to circulate in silent glances and carefully coded reports. Was the Emperor still the greatest power in this universe, or merely a powerful exile? The first demonic manifestation occurred above the Ashen continent, brief and imperfect. A tear in reality opened for less than a second, spilling shrieking entities that dissolved almost immediately, their forms unraveling as if reality rejected their existence. No prolonged incursion followed, no possession spread. The warp here did not welcome them, it tolerated them, at best, and that distinction unsettled every scholar of the forbidden. Within the Golden Throne, the Emperor's psychic shadow shifted. Custodians felt it like a distant thunder, not closer, but clearer. The throne's machine spirit registered harmonic changes, subtle recalibrations forced by pressures beyond design. The Emperor's will pressed outward, not as command, but as inquiry. For the first time in 10,000 years, he was not merely sustaining reality, he was listening. Across Terra, dreams changed. Ordinary citizens dreamed of endless skies, of towering structures unmarked by Gothic decay, of wars fought without prayer and victories claimed without gods. Some woke inspired, others woke terrified. The ecclesiarchy denounced these visions as temptation, yet could not silence them. The warp carried ideas now, not just madness. As night fell, the alien stars pulsed faintly, synchronized with disturbances detected in the Imperium. Whatever governed this universe had noticed Terra's presence fully now. Humanity's psychic footprint, immense and raw, echoed through realms not shaped for it. Somewhere beyond comprehension, attention turned toward the throne world, not in hatred, not in reverence, but in assessment. The warp howled, But the name it cried was not that of chaos undivided, nor of the emperor enthroned. It was something else, something vast enough that even gods hesitated to answer, and as Terra endured beneath that altered scream, a truth settled like cold iron in the hearts of those who understood the Imperium best. The next contact would not come as a demonic invasion, nor as divine revelation, but as something far older, far colder, and utterly indifferent to humanity's faith. The fourth day was the day the fear reached the streets. Until then, dread had lived behind sealed doors and whispered through data slates and censured prayers. Now it spilled into the open air of terror, carried on the breath of billions who no longer trusted the sky above them. Pilgrims continued to arrive at the great plazas in numbers that defied reason, throwing themselves upon the stone before shrines that had never known emptiness. They prayed until their throats bled, convinced that volume might replace certainty, that devotion might force the emperor's gaze to return. Yet devotion alone could not silence rumor. The stars were wrong, and everyone could see it. Void workers spoke of alien constellations glimpsed through docked viewports. Scribes whispered that astropathic choirs had been executed in secret. Preachers contradicted one another openly, some declaring this exile a sacred test, others proclaiming it the final proof that Terra had been judged wanting. The contradiction festered, turning faith inward until it sharpened into accusation. The first violence came without coordination. In the lower tiers of High Ultima, a group of pilgrims accused a minor priest of blasphemy for hesitating during a litany. Words turned to fists, fists to blades scavenged from manufactorum debris. By the time the Adeptus Arbites arrived, bodies already lay cooling beneath banners of the Aquila. Vox feeds carried the images upward through the hive, stripped of context, transformed into proof that heresy now walked openly upon holy Terra. The Arbites responded with practiced efficiency, sealing transit corridors and deploying shock malls and suppression fields. Order was restored within hours, but the damage lingered. Each crackdown fed the narrative that truth was being hidden, that Terra's rulers feared what the people might discover if left unchecked. In the spires above, nobles barricaded their estates, hiring private guards and hoarding food. Below, entire hab blocks fell silent as families barred doors and waited for judgment from sky or state. The ecclesiarchy attempted to seize the moment. Grand sermons were broadcast planet-wide, declaring the riots the work of faithless weaklings and Xenos-influenced heretics. Processions were ordered, vast rivers of humanity marching beneath towering statues of the emperor, chanting until their voices merged into a single thunderous plea. For a time the unity soothed the planet, a reminder of shared purpose beneath the alien stars. But unity built on fear is brittle. Among the crowds moved those who asked forbidden questions. If chaos was uncertain here, if the warp obeyed unfamiliar laws, then perhaps the Emperor's divinity was bound to the old universe alone. Perhaps faith itself required revision. Such thoughts spread quietly, passed in murmurs between strangers, and where the Arbites could not hear, they took root. The first true riot erupted near the Eternity Wall, where pilgrims and dissenters collided beneath the palace's shadow. Stones were thrown at Arbites' lines, lasfire answered. Panic surged outward as people fled, trampling the fallen. Vox nets collapsed beneath contradictory orders. Above it all, the palace loomed unchanged, its silence interpreted by each faction as validation of their own belief. Custodians observed from the battlements, unmoving. They did not intervene. Their duty lay inward, not with the shifting tides of belief below. Yet even they recognized the significance of blood spilled so close to the throne. Terra had endured rebellion before, but never while cut adrift from certainty itself. By nightfall, the riot was crushed, its leaders executed or vanished into inquisitorial custody. Official proclamations declared order restored, yet as the curfews settled and the streets emptied, Terra felt smaller, more fragile. The faith that had bound it together for millennia now pulled in opposing directions, and the alien stars watched without judgment. Somewhere in that indifferent sky lay the answer to whether this unrest was a passing wound or the first fracture of something far greater. The fifth day dawned beneath curfew sirens and sealed skies, and for the first time since the Great Crusade, the imperial palace became a fortress not merely by design, but by necessity. Gates that had stood open to sanctioned processions were sealed behind layers of auramite and void-shielded bulkheads. Transit codes were revoked. Entire wings of the palace were isolated, their access routes scrubbed from the noosphere as if they had never existed. At the heart of it all, the Adeptus Custodes stood watch, alone in a way they had not been since the Emperor had first taken his seat upon the golden throne. They moved without haste, but with finality. Each order was precise, each motion rehearsed across centuries of unbroken vigilance. Shield captains redeployed their warriors from ceremonial posts to hard defensive nodes. Kill zones were recalculated, firing arcs were redrawn to account not for known threats but for unknown impossibilities. The Custodes did not fear invasion, they prepared for it. They did not question why Terra had been taken, they accepted that it had, and adjusted accordingly. Within the inner palace the Emperor remained unchanged in form, yet altered in presence. Custodians who had stood beside him for lifetimes felt the difference most keenly. The pressure of his will was still there, immense and undeniable, but distant as though stretched across a void that resisted comprehension. It was not absence, it was separation. To lesser beings it might have felt like abandonment. To the Custodes it was a challenge. No orders came from the High Lords that day. Authority had narrowed, collapsing inward toward the throne itself. The Custodes did not require permission to act. Their mandate was older than any council, older than the Imperium's current shape. If Terra fell, if reality itself sought to claim the Emperor's body, it would do so over their corpses, and they would consider that outcome acceptable. Outside the palace walls, the planet strained against restraint. Arbite's patrols increased. Vox traffic surged with contradictory reports of unrest suppressed and unrest spreading. The Custodes ignored it all. Their world was the palace, its corridors etched with history and sealed secrets. They walked past murals of the Unification Wars and statues of Primarchs long gone, their armor reflecting the flicker of lumen globes that had never known true darkness. Yet even here, something felt wrong. The palace's machine spirits murmured uneasily, as if aware that the universe beyond its walls no longer obeyed familiar rules. In the Hall of Leng, a gathering of shield captains reviewed data drawn from sources few others were permitted to access. Warp fluctuations, psychic anomalies, failed augur sweeps. Patterns emerged, incomplete but troubling. Terra was being observed, not attacked, not tested through force, but watched with the patience of something vast and confident. The Custodes understood war. This felt like prelude. One among them, ancient beyond mortal reckoning, voiced what the others already knew. If contact came, it would not respect imperial protocol. It would not recognize sanctity or precedent. Whatever shared this universe with Terra would judge by its own standards, and those standards might find humanity wanting. The Custodes adjusted their stance accordingly. Their role was no longer merely to guard the Emperor from internal decay and external assault. They would be the first line against the incomprehensible. Deep within the Golden Throne, the machinery labored. Tech priests requested access, citing critical deviations. The Custodes denied them. No risk would be taken now. The throne endured, its ancient systems compensating through brute resilience and sacred design. The Emperor's life signs held steady, yet every custodian felt the tension building like the drawn breath before an unseen blow. As the fifth night settled, the palace lights dimmed to combat readiness. Outside, the alien stars burned cold and steady, unblinking. Terra slept uneasily beneath them, its faith shaken, its people divided. Within the inner palace, the Custodes took their positions, spears grounded, shields locked, eyes forward. Whatever came next would not find the Emperor unguarded. Yet even among these perfect warriors, a single unspoken truth lingered, heavy as fate itself. If the Custodes now stood alone, it was because the universe itself had decided to test whether even they were enough. On the sixth day, Terra reached outward. Caution yielded to necessity, and the Imperium's oldest instinct asserted itself at last, to observe, to catalogue, to understand. Explorator fleets long held in reserve were authorized to deploy, their machine spirits awakened with rights older than most nations. One by one, vessels slipped from Terra's orbit, not through the warp as they had always known it, but along routes recalculated for a reality that resisted expectation. Their departure was watched in silence. Billions followed the launches through sanctioned pict feeds, clinging to the sight of Imperial ships as proof that humanity still possessed agency. If Terra had been cast into exile, then exile would be mapped, measured, and if necessary conquered. That belief steadied nerves, even as uncertainty gnawed at the edges of reason. The first reports returned within hours. fragmented and unsettling. Auspex arrays detected stellar phenomena inconsistent with any imperial classification. Stars burned with spectra that suggested unfamiliar nuclear processes. Void currents flowed without the subtle warp turbulence navigators had once relied upon. Space itself felt heavier, denser, as though shaped by principles indifferent to psychic influence. The Mechanicus received these findings with reverence and alarm in equal measure. One explorator vessel transmitted pic captures of a shattered world adrift in void black silence. Its surface bore scars not of orbital bombardment, but of precision excision, continents carved away as if removed by deliberate design. No trace of warp corruption lingered there. Whatever had destroyed it had done so without rage, ritual, or excess. The implication spread quietly through sealed channels. Annihilation here did not require gods. As data accumulated, patterns emerged. This universe possessed order layered atop order, laws reinforced by structures so vast they bent probability itself. The warp existed, but it was constrained, filtered through frameworks that resisted its excesses. Chaos was present but diminished, its influence reduced to a shadow where once it had been a storm. The Adeptus Mechanicus struggled to reconcile this with doctrine. If reality itself enforced restraint upon the Imperium, then the galaxy was not the only crucible in which existence could take shape. Within the palace, the High Lords received the findings with grim focus. Debate was sharp but controlled. Some argued this universe represented salvation, a realm where chaos could be mastered or rendered irrelevant. Others warned that restraint implied oversight, that such order did not arise without an architect. The notion of a cosmos governed by principles beyond both emperor and ruinous powers unsettled even the most hardened among them. Deep beneath the palace, the Golden Throne responded. Its ancient systems resonated faintly with incoming data, harmonics shifting as if the machine recognized echoes of something vast approaching alignment. Tech priests monitoring the throne's internals recorded deviations they could not fully explain. Power flows stabilized in some sectors while destabilizing in others, as though the throne attempted to adapt to a broader, colder framework of reality. Across Terra, dreams intensified. Citizens dreamed of endless structures spanning stars, of silent watchers embedded within the fabric of space itself. Some woke with a sense of awe rather than fear, a dangerous emotion in the Imperium. The ecclesiarchy condemned such visions, yet could not erase the impression that this universe possessed coherence humanity had never known. The custodes reviewed the explorator findings in silence. To them the implications were clear. Terra had not been cast into chaos. It had been placed into scrutiny. This universe did not rush to destroy what entered it. It observed, measured, and only then acted. That patience was more unsettling than open hostility. As the sixth night fell, a final transmission arrived from the edge of the explorator advance. It spoke of a signal detected beneath cosmic background noise, ancient and persistent, embedded so deeply within space-time that it could not be traced to a single source. It was not a message in any human sense. It was a presence, constant and vast, like a heartbeat of the universe itself. The transmission cut without explanation. Silence followed, heavier than before. Terra had found echoes of an alien cosmos, and in those echoes lay a truth humanity could no longer avoid. This universe was not empty, not indifferent, and not unaware. Whatever governed it had noticed Terra fully now, and observation was drawing closer to response. The seventh day began with a pressure change no instrument could quantify, a tightening of existence itself that pressed against thought and matter alike. Those attuned to the warp felt it first, a sensation like distant thunder rolling through a sky that should have been empty. Terra had been observed before, now it was being acknowledged. Within the Imperium, the ruinous powers stirred, not with triumph or fury, but with something closer to uncertainty. Their presence manifested as distortions at the edge of perception, subtle ripples rather than roaring storms. For the first time since their ascension, chaos did not surge outward in hunger. It hesitated. The warp here did not belong to them as it had elsewhere, and that limitation forced caution upon entities that had never known restraint. Across Terra, sanctioned psychers collapsed as overlapping influences brushed their minds. Some whispered names that did not exist in any imperial archive. Others spoke of laughter cut short, of vast intelligences withdrawing the moment they were perceived. Demonic manifestations attempted to coalesce above the planet, only to unravel under pressures that stripped them of coherence. It was not resistance in any familiar sense. It was incompatibility. The Inquisition declared a mega-level psychic alert. Wards were reinforced. Entire districts were locked down as containment measures escalated. Yet no full invasion came. Instead, Terra experienced probing touches, brief intrusions testing boundaries and limits. The ruinous powers were learning, and learning made them dangerous in ways humanity could not predict. Within the Golden Throne, the Emperor's psychic shadow expanded. Custodians felt it as a tightening presence, sharper, more focused than it had been since the heresy. The throne's ancient mechanisms resonated under the strain, compensating through means lost to history. For the first time in millennia, the Emperor was not merely sustaining himself. He was exerting will. That exertion did not go unnoticed. Beyond the warp's familiar tides, something vast shifted its attention fully toward Terra. It did not announce itself with prophecy or revelation. It did not demand worship or submission. Its notice was felt as alignment, as cosmic structures adjusting minutely to account for an anomaly that could no longer be ignored. The Explorator signal detected days earlier intensified, its rhythm steady and inexorable. Astropaths attempting to interpret the phenomenon reported a terrifying clarity. This was not a god in the imperial sense, nor a chaos entity born of excess and belief. It was a principle made manifest, a governing force woven into the universe's foundation. Where chaos embodied possibility and corruption, this presence embodied inevitability. It did not hate, it did not love, it enforced. The ecclesiarchy responded with fury masked as certainty. Emergency synods declared the disturbances proof of divine struggle, the emperor battling alien false gods for dominion over reality itself. Shrines overflowed once more as millions prayed for victory in a war they could not see. Yet the prayers felt thinner now, their resonance dampened by a universe less receptive to raw faith. Inquisitors exchanged data in sealed chambers, drawing conclusions too dangerous to voice publicly. If this universe possessed an overriding order, then humanity's defining weapon, belief shaped into power, might hold less sway. The Emperor's divinity had been forged through humanity's collective faith and sacrifice. Here, faith alone might not be enough. Above Terra, the void changed again. Defensive augurs detected transient formations at the edge of detection, structures forming and dissolving without mass or energy signatures. They were not ships, they were markers, reference points laid down by something mapping the throne world's position within a greater framework. No weapons fired, no communication followed. Observation continued. The custodians stood ready. They felt the Emperor's will align with theirs, a rare clarity that cut through the fog of uncertainty. Whatever took notice now would find Terra defended by more than walls and fleets. It would face a will that had once challenged gods and won. Yet even among the custodians, a grim understanding settled. Victory here might not mean survival. It might mean adaptation. As night fell, the warp quieted unnaturally. The usual background murmur of madness and hunger receded, replaced by an almost clinical stillness. Psychers described it as standing in a cathedral built for something far larger than humanity, every sound swallowed by scale. The gods had taken notice, but not all gods announced themselves with fire. In the final hours of the seventh day, a single psychic pulse rippled outward from Terra, unbidden and uncontrolled. It carried no message, only presence. Somewhere beyond the reach of warp or prayer, that pulse was received, measured, and accepted as confirmation. Terra was not an accident, it was now a variable. As the alien stars burned cold and steady, humanity stood unknowingly at the threshold of judgment. Not the judgment of chaos, nor of faith, but of something that did not care what humanity believed, only what it was. And as the Emperor's will pressed outward against a universe that resisted divinity itself, the question ceased to be whether the gods had noticed Terra, and became whether Terra would survive being noticed at all. The eighth day brought no riots, no visible upheaval, and no fresh panic in the streets. Instead, it brought certainty, and that proved far more dangerous. The signal arrived without warning, without flare or spectacle, threading its way through the void as though it had always been there, waiting only for Terra to notice it. It did not come through the warp, it did not obey astropathic channels or no-spheric relays. It emerged simultaneously across every detection array, from the most ancient Mechanicus augur to the simplest civilian receiver, precise and undeniable. At first, it was mistaken for background noise, a harmonic beneath reality, steady and impossibly old. Then its pattern resolved, and the error became clear. This was no natural phenomenon. It was structured, layered, deliberate, a transmission not sent from a place but from the fabric of the universe itself, embedded so deeply that time and distance were irrelevant. Panic did not erupt. Or did. The Adeptus Mechanicus isolated the signal within moments, sealing it behind layers of encryption and ritual warding. Logic engines strained to parse it, their processes looping endlessly as assumptions failed one by one. The signal was not language. It conveyed no images, no words, no commands. It was a declaration of existence, a statement of presence older than Terra's oceans, older than humanity's first breath beneath alien skies. As its implications spread through the palace, the High Lords felt the weight of it settle upon their deliberations. This was not first contact, as the Imperium understood it. There was no emissary to confront, no fleet to engage, no ideology to denounce. The signal did not ask for response. It simply confirmed that Terra now resided within a domain governed by something vast enough to mark its own boundaries in eternity. Astropaths exposed to the signal described visions stripped of emotion, endless frameworks of light and void, stars arranged not by chance but by necessity. They spoke of civilizations rising and vanishing without judgment, of cosmic cycles unconcerned with faith or ambition. Some wept, others fell silent, unable to reconcile a universe that did not care whether it was worshipped. The ecclesiarchy reacted with fury. Emergency edicts condemned the signal as a test of faith, a deception meant to weaken humanity's devotion. Cathedrals rang with denunciations of false order and godless structure, yet beneath the rhetoric, fear crept in. The signal carried no temptation, no promise, no threat. It offered nothing to fight, nothing to corrupt. It simply existed, and in its existence, it diminished the comforting certainty that the Emperor's will defined all things. Within the Golden Throne, the Emperor's psychic presence shifted once more. Custodians felt it as a momentary alignment, a sharp clarity cutting through the static of uncertainty. The throne's machinery resonated in response to the signal, ancient systems recognizing something fundamental, not an enemy, not an ally, a constant. The Mechanicus reached a conclusion none wished to speak aloud. The signal was older than Terra, older than the warp as humanity understood it. It was a marker of jurisdiction, a declaration that this universe operated under principles immutable and enforced. Terra had not merely been noticed, it had been acknowledged as an intrusion into a system that tolerated variance only within defined limits. Across the planet, citizens experienced the signal in subtle ways. Some heard it as a distant hum beneath thought, others felt it as pressure behind the eyes, a sense of being measured. Dreams shifted again, no longer chaotic or symbolic, but stark and vast. People dreamed of standing before structures so immense that identity itself felt small, of being seen not as individuals or even as a species, but as data within an infinite equation. The custodians received the signal without reaction, yet its significance was not lost on them. Whatever governed this universe did not speak through intermediaries. It did not negotiate. If it acted, it would do so with finality. The custodians adjusted their readiness accordingly, not in anticipation of war, but of consequence. As the day wore on, the signal did not repeat. It did not escalate. It remained, steady and omnipresent, woven into reality itself. Attempts to block it failed. Attempts to isolate it proved meaningless. It was not entering Terra's systems. Terra existed within it. By nightfall, the truth had settled into every level of authority, from the throne to the streets below. Terra was no longer alone, but neither was it confronted. It had crossed into a universe that did not announce its gods with fire or madness, but with permanence. And as humanity struggled to comprehend a presence older than its history and colder than its faith, one question took shape in the silence that followed. If this signal marked the law of this cosmos, what punishment awaited those who broke it? The 9th day marked the point where belief could no longer hide behind uncertainty. The signal endured, woven into the bones of reality, and Terra's people were forced to confront what it meant to live beneath a cosmos that neither demanded nor acknowledged worship. For 10,000 years, faith had been humanity's armor, hammered into shape by suffering and sanctified by survival. Now that armor was tested not by blades, but by indifference. The ecclesiarchy answered as it always had, with absolutism. Across Terra, the Ministerum declared a unified doctrine of endurance, proclaiming that the emperor's divinity transcended universes, that his authority did not depend upon stars, signals, or cosmic structures. Massive sermons were broadcast planet-wide, their words carried into every hablok and shrine. Preachers thundered that faith was not a response to reality, but a command imposed upon it. If the universe did not yet kneel, it would be made to do so through devotion without compromise. For many, the declaration brought comfort. Processions filled the streets once more, banners snapping beneath the alien sky as millions chanted the emperor's name in defiance of the infinite above them. The act of belief itself became an act of rebellion, a refusal to accept that humanity's God might be one power among many. Tears flowed freely, not from fear alone but from a desperate need to matter. Yet beneath the surface, fractures widened. Scholars, sanctioned savants, and even some within the priesthood struggled with a quieter truth. Faith had always drawn strength from the warp, from belief shaping the immaterial into something real. Here, belief echoed weakly, dampened by structures that did not bend easily to emotion or prayer. The emperor was still present, still vast, but his reach felt constrained by laws not written for gods born of mortal minds. The Inquisition observed these developments with cold precision. Faith was useful. Faith was dangerous. In sealed chambers, inquisitors debated whether the ecclesiarchy's defiance would provoke a response from whatever enforced this universe's order. If the signal represented law, then open refusal to acknowledge it might constitute violation. Humanity had survived by challenging gods before, but never one that did not care enough to answer. Within the golden throne, the emperor's presence sharpened once again. Custodians felt it as resolve rather than reassurance. The emperor did not recoil from the infinite. He pressed against it, testing its boundaries as he once tested the warp itself. The throne's systems strained under the effort, power flows spiking as ancient mechanisms compensated for forces that resisted psychic dominance. The emperor would not submit, that much was certain. Across Terra, the people felt the tension in ways they could not articulate. Prayers grew louder, harsher, stripped of gentleness. Children were taught that doubt was treason, that to question now was to invite annihilation. Yet doubt persisted, because the infinite did not argue. It simply existed, and in its vastness, it reduced certainty to something fragile. A sanctioned psyker, brought before the High Lords under heavy guard, spoke words that silenced the chamber. During controlled exposure to the signal, she had perceived no malice, no intent to destroy, only balance. Terra's arrival had disrupted an equation older than stars, and the universe was correcting for it. Faith, she warned, might be irrelevant to that process. She was executed within the hour. The custodes took note, not of the execution, but of the fear behind it. Humanity had chosen defiance, because defiance was all it knew. Whether that choice would save or doom Terra remained uncertain. The custodes adjusted their vigilance, understanding now that the greatest threat might not come from beyond but from within, when belief collided with inevitability. As the ninth night fell, the alien stars burned with unchanged intensity. The signal persisted, unblinking, immune to prayer and proclamation alike. Terra stood beneath it, a world of faith pressing against an infinite that did not yield. Somewhere beyond comprehension, thresholds were being calculated, tolerances assessed. The universe did not rage against Terra's defiance. It waited, and in that waiting lay the most terrifying possibility of all, that faith alone might not be enough to tip the balance when the infinite finally decided to respond. On the 10th day, the golden throne faltered. It was not a failure of systems or a scream of alarms, but a pause so brief it might have been dismissed as imagination if not felt by every custodian standing vigil. The endless exhalation of power that sustained the emperor stuttered. A single uneven breath drawn against forces that no longer aligned with the throne's ancient design. Deep beneath the imperial palace, cogitators recorded anomalies cascading through sacred circuits. Power flows dipped, surged, then stabilized at unfamiliar tolerances. Tech priests fell to their knees before data streams that contradicted millennia of doctrine, chanting litanies to calm machine spirits that had never known uncertainty. The throne was adapting, not breaking, but adaptation carried risk greater than collapse. The custodes closed ranks around the emperor's sanctum. No request for access was granted, no petition heard. Their helms tracked fluctuations in psychic pressure with preternatural precision, each warrior attuned to the emperor's presence as one might feel the warmth of a dying sun. He was still there. That truth mattered more than any reading. Within the throne, the Emperor's consciousness strained against constraint. The signal that permeated the universe pressed inward now, not as assault but as boundary. The Emperor tested it, probing with will, honed through rebellion against gods and fate alike. For a heartbeat, the pressure intensified, and Terra itself trembled, a seismic shudder rippling through bedrock and spire. Across the planet, citizens staggered as if struck by vertigo. Lights flickered, Vox networks dissolved into static, before reassembling. In the streets, people fell to their knees, convinced the final judgment had arrived. The ecclesiarchy seized the moment, declaring the tremor a sign of the Emperor's struggle against the infinite, proof that he yet fought for humanity's soul. The Mechanicus was less certain. Their most forbidden models suggested the throne was no longer drawing power solely from the warp. It was interfacing, however imperfectly, with the deeper structure of this universe, siphoning stability where divinity alone could not dominate. Such a process had never been intended. The throne was becoming something new. In the Sanctum Imperialis, the Emperor's life signs wavered, then steadied. The flicker passed, but its echo remained, a subtle change in resonance that every custodian felt. The Emperor's presence was clearer, sharper, as if pain had burned away distraction. Yet there was exhaustion there too, the cost of forcing ancient will against immutable law. Silence followed, not the oppressive quiet of earlier days, but a tense equilibrium. The signal persisted, unchanged. The universe did not retaliate. It adjusted, allowing Terra to remain. For now, that restraint unsettled those who understood it. Correction delayed was not correction denied. As night fell, the throne breathed again, steady but altered. The custodians held their vigil, knowing they had witnessed more than malfunction. The Emperor had pushed outward, and the universe had answered without words. Somewhere within that exchange lay a limit, unseen but absolute. When that limit was reached, there would be no flicker, no warning tremor, only consequence. They understood, in that vigil, that the throne's momentary weakness had revealed more than vulnerability. It had shown relationship. The universe had not sought to sever the Emperor from reality, nor to silence him utterly. It had answered pressure with structure, force with boundary, as though acknowledging his presence while denying supremacy. That distinction mattered. It meant survival remained possible, but only through coexistence with laws that could not be overthrown by faith or fury. The custodians did not speak of this understanding, yet it settled among them like a new oath, unspoken and unbreakable. If the Emperor endured by adaptation, then so would they, even if adaptation meant guarding not only a god, but a bridge between humanity and an infinite order that did not bend. Far above the palace, unseen instruments recalibrated, and far beyond the stars, calculations continued. Terra's presence was still permitted, still assessed, still tolerated. For now, the throne breathed, the Emperor endured, and the universe watched, patient and precise, as if waiting to see whether this ancient defiance would learn restraint before restraint was imposed. No alarms sounded to mark this truth, yet every system seemed to anticipate a future recalibration. Fleets remained grounded, weapons stayed cold. The greatest struggle had shifted inward, toward comprehension rather than conquest. Somewhere between devotion and inevitability, Terra now balanced, and the next movement would decide whether balance became harmony or fracture became erasure. That decision loomed unseen, encoded within equations no human mind could solve, waiting for one more deviation, one more act of will, before the universe would cease observing and begin correcting. Until then, the throne endured in fragile equilibrium, and all of Terra waited beneath alien stars for the breath that might be its last. History held its breath alongside humanity in silence. The first shots were not fired in anger, nor in fear, but in instinct. On the 11th day, Terra's orbital augurs detected formations where none should have existed moments before, geometric shadows assembling along vectors that ignored inertia and momentum alike. They did not translate from the warp, they did not arrive from real space. They resolved as if reality itself had decided they belonged there. Imperial defense platforms locked targets automatically. Machine spirits screamed threat runes across command hololiths. No herald spoke, no warning was given. The formations stabilized, vast lattices of lightless structure arranged with mathematical precision, each segment emitting the same ancient resonance as the omnipresent signal. They were not fleets in the imperial sense, they were instruments. The first lance strike lanced outward from Battle Station Lux Invicta, a beam of coherent energy capable of gutting void ships kilometers long. It struck one of the structure's dead center. There was no explosion. The beam diffused, its energy redistributed harmlessly across the lattice before vanishing entirely. Return fire did not come. Instead, the formation adjusted, its geometry shifting by imperceptible degrees. That adjustment triggered escalation protocols written during the Age of Apostasy. Macro cannons roared. Nova batteries discharged. Hundreds of kilometers of void became a storm of fire as Terra's defenses unleashed the full measure of Imperial wrath. Still, the structures endured. Impacts were absorbed, redirected, nullified. It was not invulnerability, it was prioritization. The weapons were being assessed, not resisted. Then the counteraction began. Space itself bent. Gravity vectors twisted, pulling Imperial platforms out of alignment. Defense stations collided silently, their crews crushed before alarms could sound. Energy conduits overloaded as power was siphoned away into nothingness. The formations did not target population centers. They did not strike the palace. They dismantled military capability with clinical efficiency, removing threats without excess. The void became a battlefield unlike any the Imperium had known. There were no war cries, no psychic screams, no daimonic howls, only correction. Imperial admirals shouted orders into collapsing command chains, watching centuries of doctrine fail in real time. The enemy did not maneuver to flank, it did not pursue fleeing vessels. It simply advanced parameters until resistance diminished. On Terra's surface, the sky burned with reflected light as orbital debris rained down in controlled arcs, avoiding major cities with unsettling precision. Civilians watched in terror as icons of imperial might were reduced to drifting wreckage. This was not extermination, it was demonstration. Within the palace, the High Lords declared total war. All reserve fleets were ordered to deploy. Mars activated weapons forbidden since the heresy. The custodians did not move. Their focus remained inward, upon the Emperor, whose presence surged as the conflict unfolded. The throne vibrated with strain as his will pressed outward, meeting resistance not of malice, but of absolute structure. The Emperor reached into the conflict, not through rage, but through force of being. A psychic wave rolled outward from Terra, a manifestation of authority that had once cowed gods. For a moment, the formations hesitated. Their geometry flickered, recalculating in response to a variable they had not encountered before. That hesitation was the Imperium's only victory. The response was immediate. New structures manifested, larger, more complex, their resonance harmonizing with the first. The psychic pressure met a boundary and dispersed, contained within frameworks that bent but did not break. The Emperor's will was acknowledged, measured, and limited. Above Terra, the battle reached its apex. An Imperial battleship, its reactors overloaded in a final act of defiance, rammed directly into one of the formations. The impact tore a void rent across kilometers of space. For a heartbeat, the lattice destabilized, fragments dissolving into raw energy. Then the rent sealed, the formation reassembled, altered but intact. Silence followed. Imperial weapons fell quiet as targeting solutions vanished. The formations ceased advancing, they held position, their purpose fulfilled. Terra's orbital defenses lay shattered, but the planet itself remained untouched. No invasion followed, no ultimatum was issued. Across the throne world, the truth settled with crushing weight. This had been war, and it had been lost before humanity understood its rules. The enemy had not sought conquest, it had enforced compliance. Terra had exceeded tolerated parameters, and force had been applied to restore equilibrium. Within the Golden Throne, the Emperor endured the aftermath in silence. His presence dimmed slightly, not from injury but from expenditure. The custodians felt it and closed ranks tighter than ever before. Outside, the alien stars burned on, indifferent to victory or defeat. The formations began to dissolve, fading back into the fabric of reality from which they had emerged. As they vanished, the omnipresent signal intensified briefly, its rhythm unwavering. The message was clear without words. Terra had been warned. As debris drifted in orbit and the Imperium counted losses it could not replace, one realization eclipsed all others. This universe did not wage war for dominance, it waged it for correction. And if Terra challenged its laws again, the next response would not stop at dismantling defenses. After the war that had not been meant as conquest, Terra entered a silence deeper than any curfew. Wreckage still burned in orbit, its light staining the alien stars with drifting scars, but no new formations appeared. The universe had spoken through force, then withdrawn, leaving humanity to absorb the meaning. It was in that quiet, on the 12th day, that the Emperor changed. It began as a ripple through the golden throne, subtle enough that only the custodies noticed at first. The steady rhythm of the machine's output shifted, not weakening, but altering cadence, as if aligning with a pulse not its own. Tech priests monitoring secondary systems reported fluctuations that did not match damage patterns from the recent conflict. Something internal was occurring, something unprecedented. Within the throne, the Emperor dreamed, or perhaps he woke. His consciousness, long bound in a state between death and dominion, moved differently now. Custodians felt it as a presence that no longer pressed blindly outward, but turned inward, reflective and searching. For 10,000 years, his will had been a blazing imperative, sustaining the Astronomicon, anchoring humanity through sheer force of belief. Now that force folded in upon itself, not diminished but focused. Those nearest the throne experienced visions without psychic projection. No warp surge accompanied them, no demonic echo followed. Instead, they perceived fragments of vast structures, equations written into space-time itself, and a horizon beyond which even gods were constrained. These were not prophecies, they were understandings. Across Terra, sensitive minds stirred. Astropaths who had survived quarantine awoke from enforced sedation, speaking calmly for the first time since the exile. They described a presence no longer shouting across infinity, but listening to it. The Emperor was no longer pushing against the universe's boundaries alone. He was comprehending them. The ecclesiarchy reacted with confusion bordering on fear. Reports filtered upward of reduced miracle manifestation, of relics that no longer burned with the same intensity beneath prayer. Panic threatened to undo what unity remained, but the absence of catastrophe stayed their hand. Faith was not being stripped away, it was being rendered quieter, more precise. The Inquisition recognized the danger and the opportunity simultaneously. A God who adapted could survive where defiance alone would fail. A God who learned could reshape humanity's place within this cosmos. But learning required acceptance of limitation, and limitation was heresy to many. Within the Golden Throne, the Emperor reached beyond memory. He perceived his own origins anew, not as myth but as fact, a being shaped by humanity's belief, amplified by sacrifice, sustained by the warp's mutable nature. Here, in a universe governed by enforced structure, those truths mattered differently. Divinity here was not born from worship, it was permitted through coherence. For a moment, that stretched across hours, the throne's output dipped to levels unseen since the heresy. Alarms screamed and were silenced. Custodians locked into defensive stance, prepared for the unthinkable. Then the output stabilized, lower than before, but infinitely steadier. The Emperor's presence no longer flared, it endured. Across Terra, people slept without dreams. For the first time since the exile, there were no visions of vastness or judgment. The omnipresent signal did not intensify, it did not react. It simply remained, as it always had, a constant within which change was permitted only when aligned. When the Emperor's consciousness fully reasserted itself, it did so with altered intent. He did not rage against the universe that constrained him. He acknowledged it, not as master, not as servant, but as equal participant in a reality larger than either faith or chaos. That acknowledgement sent a resonance through the throne, a harmonic alignment that eased strains thought permanent. The custodes felt certainty return, not as absolute command but as purpose. Their Emperor still lived, he still willed, but his war was no longer one of domination. It was one of persistence. Deep within the palace, a single phrase echoed through Narsphere channels reserved for truths too dangerous to speak aloud. The Emperor had not been silenced by exile. He had been challenged by context. As the 12th night fell, the alien stars seemed dimmer, not in brightness but in threat. Terra remained scarred, diminished, yet intact. The universe had corrected, and the Emperor had adapted. Whether that adaptation marked the beginning of humanity's salvation or the slow abandonment of everything it believed remained unclear. Within the Golden Throne, the Emperor rested in a state neither dream nor wakefulness, poised between will and understanding. The next step would not come through war, it would come through choice. And when that choice was made, it would reshape not only Terra's fate, but the balance between faith and inevitability itself. In the days that followed the Emperor's quiet realignment, Terra discovered what isolation truly meant. Not the isolation of siege or warp storm, not the long centuries of being beset on every frontier, but a deeper solitude born of displacement. The throne world still turned beneath its unfamiliar stars, still breathed through hive vents and cathedral spires, yet it no longer belonged to any known greater whole. The Imperium, as it had been understood, was gone. No astropathic echoes returned from beyond Sol. No faint psychic impressions suggested distant fleets or loyal worlds struggling blindly in the dark. Whether the Imperium still existed elsewhere, severed and ignorant of Terra's fate, or whether Terra alone had been taken, no one could say. The High Lords spoke cautiously of contingency, but behind closed doors they faced a truth more frightening than annihilation. Humanity's heart might now beat alone in a universe that neither needed nor desired it. The population felt the change in subtler ways. Work resumed as it always did, because humanity survived through motion. Manufacturums roared back to life, processions became smaller, more controlled, their fervor tempered by exhaustion. Faith did not vanish, but it hardened, less ecstatic, more defensive. People prayed not for dominion, but for endurance, for permission to continue existing beneath an infinite that had already demonstrated its power. The ecclesiarchy struggled to redefine purpose. Sermons no longer promised inevitable triumph. Instead, they spoke of stewardship, of humanity as a chosen remnant, tasked with preserving the Emperor's light in a cosmos hostile to excess. Some priests resisted this shift, clinging to absolutism, but their voices carried less weight now. The universe had answered absolutism with correction, and the memory of that answer lingered. The Inquisition tightened its grip, not out of paranoia alone, but necessity. Ideologies bloomed in the cracks left by shattered certainty. Some whispered that Terra should submit, adapt fully to the universe's laws and abandon divine ambition. Others preached that the First Contact War had been a test, and that humanity must rebuild its strength in silence before striking again. Both extremes were watched carefully. Neither could be allowed to define the future prematurely. Within the imperial palace, the custodes maintained their vigil unchanged, yet even they recognized the subtle transformation. The Emperor's presence was steadier now, less explosive, but no less vast. He no longer strained constantly against the universe's boundaries. Instead, he existed within them, testing where pressure could be applied without provoking response. It was a patience born not of weakness but of understanding. Explorator fleets no longer ventured outward aggressively. Their role shifted from expansion to observation, mapping tolerances and constants, learning which actions produced reaction and which were ignored. Knowledge replaced conquest as humanity's sharpest tool. Terra, once the axis of a galaxy-spanning empire, had become a study subject within a greater system. At night, citizens still gazed upward, though fewer expected answers from the stars. The alien constellations no longer inspired immediate terror. Familiarity dulled fear, even when fear remained justified. Children were born who would never know the Emperor's stars as they had once been, and to them this sky was simply reality, not exile. That realization troubled the High Lords more than any riot. If a generation arose that accepted limitation as natural, then the Imperium's ancient hunger for dominance might wither. Whether that would save humanity or diminish it beyond recognition remained uncertain. The omnipresent signal endured, unchanged, a constant reminder that Terra existed by allowance, not right. Yet allowance was something. The universe had not erased Terra. It had not demanded submission. It had merely placed humanity within context, stripping away the illusion that reality bent inevitably toward its beliefs. In that context, Terra stood alone, but not defeated. Alone among universes, it endured as it always had, scarred, stubborn and unyielding. The Emperor remained upon his throne, neither silent nor supreme, but present, adapting alongside his species. Whatever future awaited humanity would not be written by faith alone, nor by force alone, but by choices made beneath stars that did not care who ruled them. And somewhere beyond those stars, unseen mechanisms continued their endless calculation, waiting to see whether Terra's solitude would forge wisdom or merely delay extinction. By the 14th day, the weight of survival gave way to the weight of meaning. Terra still lived, still endured beneath alien stars, yet endurance alone no longer satisfied the Emperor or his realm. The question that had haunted humanity since the exile could no longer be deferred or buried beneath protocol. Terra had been spared, corrected, and permitted to remain. The reason for that mercy, if it was mercy at all, demanded understanding. Within the imperial palace, deliberations deepened beyond strategy and doctrine. The High Lords argued no longer about weapons or fleets, but about purpose. Some believed Terra had been chosen as a proving ground, a test case for whether belief-born divinity could coexist with enforced cosmic order. Others feared Terra was merely an anomaly tolerated until a threshold was crossed, at which point erasure would follow without ceremony. Both interpretations carried implications too vast to ignore. The Emperor listened. His presence, steady and deliberate, no longer surged with the blind imperative of survival. Instead, it hovered at the edge of perception, vast and contemplative. The custodes sensed his attention shifting outward, not in challenge, but in inquiry. The universe had declared its laws through force and signal. Now the Emperor sought to understand the intent behind them, if intent existed at all. The omnipresent signal remained unchanged, yet new patterns emerged around it, subtle fluctuations that suggested responsiveness rather than automation. Explorator data revealed microscopic adjustments in space-time curvature near Terra, as though the universe refined its containment not to punish, but to accommodate. Terra was no longer merely tolerated. It was being integrated. That realization unsettled the ecclesiarchy more than any defeat. Integration implied compromise, and compromise threatened the absolutes upon which imperial faith had been built. Yet even among the priesthood, voices rose that dared to reinterpret destiny. Perhaps humanity had never been meant to rule reality through faith alone. Perhaps survival itself was the Emperor's true mandate, and dominion merely a means that no longer applied. Across Terra, citizens felt the shift in ways they could not name. The fear that had once sharpened devotion dulled into wary acceptance. Life continued not because victory was promised, but because existence itself demanded it. Parents taught their children not only the Emperor's name but caution, restraint, and the value of adaptation. These lessons spread quietly without proclamation, reshaping humanity's character in increments too small to resist. The Inquisition compiled its most dangerous report yet, sealed beneath layers of authority few could breach. It suggested that Terra's displacement had not been random. The probability of such translation, intersecting precisely with a universe governed by constraint rather than chaos, bordered on impossibility. Whether engineered by an external force or precipitated by the Emperor's own actions long ago, Terra's exile carried the shape of destiny. Within the Golden Throne, the Emperor reached a conclusion no mortal voice would ever articulate fully. Destiny was not a path imposed by gods or stars, it was a negotiation between will and limitation. Humanity had always mistaken expansion for purpose, conquest for meaning. Here, stripped of its empire and placed within an indifferent infinite, humanity faced a choice, stripped to its essence. To resist endlessly would invite annihilation. To submit entirely would erase what made humanity distinct. Between those extremes lay a narrow, precarious path, one of coexistence without surrender, of belief tempered by understanding. The Emperor's will aligned with that path, not out of concession, but strategy. Survival was not retreat, it was continuation under new rules. As this understanding settled, the universe responded not with signal or force, but with stillness. No new corrections followed, no new structures manifested in orbit. Terra's existence stabilized within defined tolerances, as though a decision had been registered and accepted. The custodes felt certainty return, different from before but no less resolute. Their duty had not diminished, it had evolved. They guarded not only a god but a threshold between humanity and a reality that would not bend to arrogance. That vigilance would never end. On the 14th night, the alien stars seemed distant once more, not closer, not kinder, but familiar in their indifference. Terra remained alone, yet no longer adrift. Destiny had not been revealed as salvation or doom, it had been reframed as responsibility, and as the Emperor rested within the Golden Throne, his will aligned with a universe that enforced balance rather than belief. The final uncertainty took shape. If destiny was now a choice rather than a decree, then humanity would be judged not by what it claimed to rule, but by how it chose to endure when the universe itself refused to kneel. The 15th day did not arrive with revelation or fire. It came quietly, like the settling of dust after a long collapse, when the shape of what remained could finally be seen. Terra still turned beneath its unfamiliar sky, scarred by war that had not sought victory, shaped by forces that did not announce themselves with prophecy. The universe had not ended, and neither had humanity. That truth alone felt momentous. Across the throne world, routine stabilized into something resembling permanence. Defense grids were rebuilt with intolerances, now carefully observed. Fleets no longer postured for dominance but for deterrence, calibrated to avoid provoking correction. The Imperium that existed upon Terra was smaller, more contained, yet more focused than it had been in millennia. Stripped of its galactic sprawl, humanity was forced to look inward, not for comfort, but for definition. Within the imperial palace, the golden throne endured in steady equilibrium. Its systems no longer screamed against reality, nor did they blaze with unchecked power. The emperor remained bound, yet his presence carried a new quality, neither diminished nor triumphant. It was measured. He no longer sought to overwrite the universe. He sought to exist within it, without surrendering what he was. The custodians sensed this change with solemn clarity. Their vigil remained absolute, but the nature of what they guarded had evolved. They no longer stood merely against betrayal or invasion. They stood as witnesses to an unprecedented state of being, a god constrained yet unbroken, adapting without capitulation. The emperor's will still burned, but it burned like a controlled star, not a consuming inferno. The ecclesiarchy declared the survival of Terra a miracle, and in a way it was. Yet their language shifted subtly, focusing less on promised dominion and more on sacred endurance. The emperor was no longer proclaimed ruler of all existence, but guardian of humanity's right to persist. That reframing unsettled some, comforted others, and reshaped belief into something quieter and more resilient. The Inquisition, ever vigilant, recorded the final conclusions of their analysis in vaults sealed beyond reach. Terra had not been chosen for extinction, nor had it been elevated above the universe it now inhabited. It had been placed into balance, allowed to exist so long as it did not threaten the structure that governed all else. Humanity was not special here. It was permitted. That permission carried weight greater than any conquest. It meant the future was possible, but not guaranteed. Every act of expansion, every assertion of power, would now be measured not by rivals or gods, but by the universe itself. The margin for error was finite. Beyond Terra's orbit, the omnipresent signal remained, unchanged and unyielding. It no longer inspired panic. It had become a horizon, a boundary humanity learned to sense instinctively. It did not speak. It did not threaten. It simply was, a reminder that existence here was conditional. Within the golden throne, the emperor reached no further that day. He did not test limits or press outward. Instead, he held his will steady, maintaining alignment with the laws that constrained him. That restraint was not surrender. It was preparation. For the emperor had learned something the universe had not anticipated fully. Humanity adapted. Children born beneath alien stars grew without memories of the Astronomican's guiding blaze. To them, this sky was normal, this limitation natural. They learned discipline without despair, faith without certainty of supremacy. In them humanity's future took shape, quieter, leaner, but no less stubborn. The High Lords understood at last that the story had not ended. It had narrowed. Terra was no longer the unquestioned heart of reality, but a singular point of defiance within it. From that point humanity could still grow, still learn, still endure, so long as it remembered the lesson written into the stars above. The emperor rested within the throne, not dreaming, not waking, but watching. His war had changed, as all wars must when the battlefield itself enforces rules beyond victory and defeat. He would not conquer this universe. He would survive it. And somewhere beyond perception, vast mechanisms continued their endless calculation. Terra remained within acceptable parameters. For now, that was not an ending. It was a condition. As the 15th night settled, no alarms sounded, no visions came, no corrections followed. Terra existed, and that existence carried meaning, shaped not by prophecy, but by choice. Whether humanity would one day transcend these boundaries or perish within them remained unanswered. The universe did not close its eyes. It watched. So did the emperor. And between them, suspended in fragile balance, humanity endured, its future unwritten, its defiance intact, standing at the edge of annihilation and adaptation alike, knowing at last that survival itself was the greatest act of rebellion.